Hey guys, Donner Party Trail continues. I'm in Wyoming at this place called Guernsey, this town called Guernsey, where there's these amazing wagon ruts carved into the friggin' rock. I mean, this just goes to show how many friggin' people dragged all their household possessions 2,000 miles across the country to get some free land. This is solid sandstone. And, well, I mean, I think they say over 500,000 people did this trail. And, well, let's just say there was some families had more than one wagon. So, I don't know, probably 500,000 wagons altogether. One after the other ended up carving straight through the sandstone. It's pretty impressive. I saw some wagon swales, is what they call it, when it's just a shallow depression in the grass farther back east. But now we're in the west. And this is hardcore. Just like those pioneers were. Okay, it's day 4 of my trip, and I spent the night here at this rest area in Wyoming. Not the most scenic campsite, but overall it wasn't bad. It was pretty quiet, and at least there was flush toilets and running water. Whew. I'm pretty good at keeping clean while I'm camping, but it's been 4 days now, and I am starting to get kind of funky. Mostly I need to wash my hair. And I've only been camping for 4 days. Imagine how funky these pioneers got after being on the trail for 5 months. I mean, I'm sure occasionally they could take a dip in a river or a stream, but I'm not sure how that worked with the women because they were so modest back then. I don't know if the women on the trail ever had a chance to take a bath. And like I mentioned, they were menstruating and taking care of puking babies, and in some cases even giving birth along the way. And here I am complaining about not being able to wash my hair. I wonder if the women on the Oregon Trail ever washed their hair. Sorry, but these are details that interest me, and I can't find answers to them anywhere online. To me, these personal parts of daily life are what make people seem real and not just boring history. You know what I mean? These were real people, just like you and me, dealing with the same stuff we do. I mean, like I said, babies were born on the trail, and I'm sure they must have been conceived on the trail. I mean, it's not like there's much privacy in the back of a covered wagon, but somehow they made it happen. And think about all those single men. Aside from the families, there were also a lot of single guys heading west, either on their own or working as teamsters, driving someone else's oxen. And you know how guys are. I guess there must have been a lot of sneaking off behind the trees, either solo or with teenage girls they were traveling with. I'm not trying to be salacious, but it's part of life and it's interesting to think about. Something like 1 out of 10 immigrants died on this journey, and the immigrants knew that, so there must have been a sort of eat, drink, and be merry vibe, because they never knew if they were going to die the next day. Anyway, this rest area is also cool because it happens to be right at the site of Independence Rock, which was another major milestone on the trail. It's basically just a huge rock outcropping where traveling passengers carved their names. They called it Independence Rock because if you were making good time, you were supposed to get there by July 4th, American Independence Day. I mean, think about it. Since they didn't have GPS or odometers, the only way they could keep track of the distance they'd traveled was by landmarks. Scotts Bluff, which I passed yesterday, marked the 1/3 point of the journey, and they tried to keep pace by hitting Independence Rock by July 4th. Well, the Donner Party didn't get here until July 11th. But like I said, they weren't worried about it because they were planning to take that shortcut. In fact, they were so relaxed about it that they spent a couple extra days just hanging out at the spot where they did camp on Independence Day, which was about 100 miles back on the trail. Now, speaking of the Hastings cutoff, they were still planning on taking that untested route Even though when they'd arrived at Fort Laramie in what's now eastern Wyoming, they'd run into an old army buddy of James Reed's named Jim Kleiman, who had just returned from California himself, and who strongly advised them not to take the cutoff, but to stick to the regular route. But James Reed remained firm in his resolve to take the cutoff, and despite Kleiman's considerable experience as a mountain man out west, the advice was ignored. Anyway, before I roll on to my next stop on the trail, I figure I might as well take a quick hike up to the top of Independence Rock and see if I can check out any inscriptions. I'm pretty sure I read that at least a few members of the Donner Party carved their names into this, but gosh, I wouldn't even know where to look. But who knows, we might get lucky. I mean, look how cool this is. Like, people really preserve this friggin' trail. It's really interesting. I mean, if you ever get the chance to do what I'm doing, I really recommend it. I mean, it's well marked, it's easy to travel. You just have to have a lot of free time and gas money. Wow, it seems like most of the carvings have pretty much worn away, but they did fence off and preserve a few of them here. And it looks like somebody named Reed carved his name, but that doesn't look like it was James Reed. Still pretty cool though. Okay, yikes, looks like there's some threatening weather rolling in here, and I'm carrying my camera on a selfie stick, which is basically a giant lightning rod. So I probably shouldn't do this, but I feel like I should climb to the top of the rock, because when am I gonna be here again? And I bet the view is amazing. Better go quick. Woo! I made it! Or almost. I guess there's like there's some names carved up here too. But these look like they're newer. You know what I mean? Like 94. I'm pretty sure that's not 1894. This one says June 1853. Can that be real? Oh, it's hard to know if some joker just did it as a prank, but I don't know. The handwriting does look kind of old-timey. Look, here's one that says July 4th, 1850. Right on schedule. Wow, that's just 4 years after the Donner Party passed here. That's pretty crazy that you can still read it, assuming it's real. It's a shame I have to be so skeptical, but in this day and age of fake news, you know? Whoa, I don't know if you can hear that. There's like some cow making that noise over there. Holy moly, look how beautiful this is though. Oh my god, let me give you guys a panorama from the top of Independence Rock, Wyoming. Beautiful mountain meadow. Cows grazing peacefully by the side of, I think that's a Sweetwater River. It's the highway going by. There's the rest area. There's my rig. That's the way I came last night from Casper and Nebraska beyond that. It's pretty impressive territory, and you can see where they definitely knew they were getting into the mountains now. I'll just check out a few more names before I leave. Look at this guy. 1920, 1978. Man, it's kind of cool to see all these different ages all together. Just kind of reinforces the idea that people are people and always have been. Look, some hippie was here back in 1969. Look at that. Wow. Man, I sure would love to write Wonderhussy up here, but dang it, I forgot my chisel. And besides, like I said, it looks like thunderstorms moving in, and I don't want to get hit by lightning, so I think I better just get back down and get back on the trail. Another landmark in the area was this narrow gorge known as Devil's Gate. It wasn't on the trail. They didn't try to drag their wagons through it, but it was just off the trail. And I remember reading, I think most of the Donner Party went down there to check it out on their noon break one day. And look at this sign that they have here right by it. I mean, you can pause it and read the whole thing if you want, but it basically just talks about, like what I said earlier, that illness and death were common. 1 out of 10 immigrants who started on the trail died before completing the trip. It says 90% of the deaths were caused by disease, and the rest were childbirth, accidents, and violence. In the late 1840s and early 1850s, cholera. Something like 90% of these people died of cholera, which was caused by drinking tainted drinking water, which, to be honest, when you have thousands of people all pooping in the same place, is it really any surprise? It says in a few instances, almost entire wagon trains were wiped out by cholera. Can you imagine? Oh. And I guess it says that over 20 known graves are on this ridge. 20 people are buried up here. I mean, this was like the halfway point on the journey, according to that sign. It's about 1,000 miles in, so I guess people were starting to drop like flies. But interestingly, no one else had died in the Donner Party yet, aside from Sarah Keys back at Alcove Spring. That would soon change. Now they were getting up into the mountains for real. No more easy cruising on the gentle, mostly flat prairie. They had to cross the Rocky friggin' Mountains. Another milestone was crossing the Continental Divide. This is the point in North America where water flows into the Atlantic Ocean on the east side and toward the Pacific Ocean on the western slope. Crossing over this must have given them a real sense of accomplishment, but it was probably also kind of freaky, like the point of no return. You know, now even the water's flowing a different way. No going back now. If you look at a map of the California Trail, you'll notice it doesn't go in a straight line from Independence to Sacramento. It meanders a lot to stay close to rivers, and it veers pretty far to the north. Well, that was because of the Rocky Mountains. If you've ever been to Colorado, you can imagine how insane it would be to even try dragging heavy wooden wagons full of household crap and crying babies over those crazy mountain passes. Fortunately, there happens to be a pretty flat and gradual pass up here in Wyoming called South Pass. And that's why the trail veers so far to the north. It adds a lot of miles, but in the long run it saves a lot of grief and overall travel time. That's probably another reason why James Reed wanted to take the Hastings cutoff so bad. Looking at a map, I mean, even the primitive maps that they had back then, it must have been frustrating to look at how far out of the way they had to go just to cross the Rockies. So any shortcut that made for a more direct passage must have seemed appealing and even smart. Up till this point, the Oregon Trail and the California Trail were basically the same. But about 20 miles west of here, at a place called the Parting of the Ways, the two trails split off, with immigrants who were heading towards Oregon going north through Idaho, and immigrants who were heading to California going south through Utah. All right, I admit it, I'm nowhere near as hardcore as those pioneers were. I broke down and shelled out $12 for a shower at this truck stop in Wyoming where I camped last night. Like I said, I really needed to wash my hair. It was getting pretty funky. It wasn't actually a bad place to stay. They actually allow overnight camping here, so I didn't get hassled. And I was able to feed and water my horse at the gas station. But now, it's back on the trail. For reference, this is day 5, and I've covered about 1,000 miles, about the halfway point in the journey to California. To get to this point, just west of the Continental Divide and over the Rocky Mountains, took the Donner Party almost 2.5 months, and the journey was starting to wear on them. Once they left the lush prairie behind, water sources were becoming scarcer, and their poor, hard-driven oxen were starting to die from drinking bad water. But at this point, they still had enough food to get them through, especially since they were about to reach Fort Bridger, where they could resupply. By the time they got here to Fort Bridger, the size of the wagon train the Donner Party was traveling with had shrunk quite a bit. Of the hundreds of wagons in that big company they'd been traveling with, many of them peeled off towards Oregon to the north when they got to the Parting of the Ways. And those California-bound immigrants who didn't feel comfortable taking the newfangled and unproven Hastings cutoff also split off there. And most of the remaining wagons had pushed on ahead of the slowpoke Donner Party, who were lagging behind by a few days. To his credit, Lansford Hastings had agreed to meet the immigrants here at Fort Bridger and personally guide them through the shortcut. But because the Donner Party was lagging behind, they missed his departure by a few days and had to figure out the shortcut on their own. So they rested here at Fort Bridger for 5 more days, costing themselves more time, and even worse, unbeknownst to the Donner Party, one of the immigrants they'd been riding with earlier on the trail had ridden ahead and gotten some intel that the Hastings cutoff was a bad idea. Well, he left a letter for them at Fort Bridger informing them of what he'd learned. But for whatever reason, the guys who operated this fort, Jim Bridger and then his partner Luis Vasquez, never gave them the letter. Now, maybe they just forgot, or maybe they were being greedy. Because guess what? There was a lot of money in selling fresh oxen and supplies to all these wagon trains. And the main trail to California bypassed Fort Bridger, going to Fort Hall instead. But the Hastings cutoff went right by Fort Bridger. So it was obviously not in their best business interest to spread bad news about the Hastings cutoff. Either way, the Donner Party never got the letter. And to be fair, they probably would have ignored it anyways, just like they did Jim Kleiman's advice back at Fort Laramie. And so, even though Lansford Hastings had left without them just a few days previously, they set off from Fort Bridger on the unknown Hastings cutoff on the last day of July. This is where the Donner Party became the Donner Party. Most of the families who would end up getting stranded together were now traveling together, totaling 74 men, women, and children. And back at the parting of the ways, they had officially elected George Donner the captain of the wagon train. Apparently, even though they were still following James Reed's advice about this Hastings cutoff, George Donner was better liked. And now, their wagon train was officially known as the Donner Party. By the way, when I talk about Fort Bridger and Fort Laramie, they were nothing like the restored versions that you see today. I mean, these were the early days of these forts, and I mean, these were like outposts of civilization in a vast wilderness, but they were really, like, if you ever watched that movie The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio where he gets attacked by the bear, they go to a fort in that movie that was probably a more realistic depiction. I mean, basically just like a wooden fence surrounding a little patch of mud and maybe a few log cabins, if that. Certainly wasn't anything like the way they look now. But at least they were outposts of civilization. And after leaving Fort Bridger, the Donner Party wouldn't encounter another fort or opportunity to resupply until the very end of their journey at Sutter's Fort in California, almost 800 miles to the west.